afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining us and welcome to the Local and Ethnic Media Roundtable that's featuring forecasters to discuss the 2022 Atlantic hurricane season outlook. With us is Josh Rapp. He's our in-house meteorologist here at NYC. And we also have Nelson Vaz, who is National Weather Service warning coordination meteorologist, and also Rennie Vandewich. He is from DTN, Vice President of Weather Operations. So welcome everyone, and thank you for coming. So let's just get started. First question we have here is, you all have a variety of severe weather, you've all seen a variety of severe weather events. What have you learned, and how will those experiences shape your outlook in the future?
Whoever you want to go, we can. You can go, Ted. Okay, check. Yeah, so DTN is a global company, so we have experience seeing literally all types of weather across the globe and the impact. And I think the thing that we've learned is, over time, our focus is not just on what the forecast is, but the impact of that onto people and businesses. And so we've put a lot more effort on the planning side of severe weather and impactful weather plans as we work with business and communities. And so a lot of the effort needs to be the focus on the planning beforehand. We find that when impactful weather happens, if there's a really solid plan in place, that takes away a lot of confusion. Weather forecasts can change pretty rapidly, especially as you get near the event and more data comes in. But as long as there's a really solid plan in place on how to react and prepare for the impactful weather, the results of severe weather can be lessened and the risk can be mitigated. So for us, it's really putting a lot of more focus on the planning phase of building action plans and communicating the risk beforehand, so that when the anxiety of an event starts to begin, you can refer to the plan and you make a lot better decisions as a result, as opposed to having this impactful weather and sort of reacting under tension. You tend to make mistakes. We all do under those scenarios. So that's one of the big learnings that we've found.
Yeah, thank you, Rennie. So, for us, National Weather Service, our mission is protection of life and property through our forecasts, our watches, warnings. We're the official federal government agency responsible for these forecasts, watches, warnings, alerts, most of which you see on TV. But we work together with the whole weather enterprise. So DTN has an important role, and the private sector meteorologists in terms of providing weather information, and working, of course, with Josh as well, a New York City meteorologist, to really downscale things and make it hyper-local for New York City. So for us, I've been at the office for 19 years. I actually grew up in the area, and so a lot of knowledge in terms of weather that occurs here. Our focus as the New York office, we focus on Long Island, New York City, northeastern New Jersey, lower Hudson Valley, and southern Connecticut. So it's really knowing working with the emergency management partners here. I think, as Rennie kind of alluded to, the preparedness is huge. The education outreach, I think, just doing something like this today, I think that's very important, is allowing our partners, allowing the public, allowing our media partners, emergency management partners, to know what we do, the products and services we provide, and then for them to be able to provide the education outreach so it can be understood, so you can prepare and plan ahead of time. Right now, preparing for the hurricane season is I think is ideal, is important. And then during the events, or as the events are approaching, we have a variety of products and services that we provide. So it's the education outreach that you kind of plan, do ahead of time, that kind of lays the foundation for the understanding and to be able to act. I think that's the important point. And just, I think just an example of that, we had Sandy here, devastating event, of course Ida as well, but it's sometimes those significant events in our area, and unfortunately deadly and catastrophic events, where you do learn the most as a whole partnership between the Weather Service, Weather Enterprise, and our emergency management, in this case, New York City Emergency Management Partners. Sandy, we had pretty good forecasts in terms of what the water levels would be, but, we didn't know all the vulnerabilities that there are in New York City. We didn't have the great tools, visualization tools, things like that, to represent, all right, we're expecting a certain water level, but what does this look like in terms of water above ground? Maps, impact catalogs. So it's things like that after events, doing real deep post-analysis, post-assessment, working with our emergency management partner, what are the needs, what are the timelines for action, what are the vulnerabilities, we've been able to kind of strategically not only improve the forecasting of these events, improve the visualization and communication of these events, improve the remote sensing of these events, and then improve the education, outreach, understanding of these events. So it's the same thing we're going to be, we're in the process of doing with IDA. That's kind of just an example of how we use our weather experience to move the science forward, but also the public safety aspect, and emergency management. Help emergency management in terms of this response as well.
Thanks. So I've been here with NYSM for almost 3 years now, going to my sort of third warm season overall. Prior to that, all of my meteorology experience came from the military. So coming into a field that I hadn't been a part of before, the sort of emergency management side, sort of going off of what Nelson said, when you have one of these really, truly extreme events, an event that really hasn't happened before, that's where you get to see how the elements that you predicted, the atmospheric elements, then interact with the built environment to see what those impacts are. And that's really, I think, one of the biggest challenges that the weather enterprise as a whole faces, whether you're a commercial weather agency or you're NOAA, or like in this case for myself working directly for the city. It's very difficult to say exactly what the impacts might be, even if you have a perfect forecast. If we know the rainfall amounts and exactly where they're going to fall, how is that then going to interact, specifically with a neighborhood in northern Queens, or with a shoreline along the Rockaways or something like that. And it is unfortunate that it sometimes takes a major catastrophic event for you to really be able to calibrate those sort of impact-based predictions. And so I think that's one thing we've all been working on together, is trying to just better understand what the impacts are, and particularly in a highly urban environment like New York City. Things are constantly being built and rebuilt, and so even if, for instance, we had another event exactly, it's very similar to Ida, but maybe you take the storm and you tilt it 90 degrees, you might get a totally different impact. And it could be worse, it could be less. Unfortunately, we don't quite have the scientific data to say. We can, sort of speculate or theorize about what events might occur. And it really, from that point, it's then doing the outreach. It's doing the sort of preparedness, that the functions that emergency management does, going out into communities and trying to get communities prepared for storms. I think another just challenge in general with severe weather is that the public sometimes, I think, feels a little overwarned. You get these flash flood events, and when a warning is issued, and if it's a really significant flash flood event, people's phones might go off. I'm sure you've gotten those before. And when you're drawing that area of the warning area, not every single inch of that area is going to get horribly catastrophic flooding. It might just be in a portion of the area, but of course you have to warn everyone there. And so one of the challenges, I think, is how do you keep population and citizenry, particularly those in those vulnerable populations, how do you keep them continually prepared without also just overwarning them sort of all the time? And I think that's really one of the challenges those sorts of extreme weather events. So finding better tools to communicate, you know, continually doing that outreach that we do, that I think that really sort of helps with that issue.
Thank you, Josh. Before we move on to the next question, I just wanted to say that the point of this roundtable is so you all can learn not only more about the 2022 hurricane season outlook, but to get to know our agency a little bit more, and we will have a Q&A at the end of the roundtable. Josh, you mentioned a little bit about how you got started. So the next question is, you all have a wealth of knowledge in the field of meteorology, and what sparked your interest in the field, and how did you get started? Josh, you can go first.
Sure, yeah. Yeah, so me personally, I just sort of happened to get into weather by happenstance. It wasn't really planned. I wasn't one of those, you know, kids who had always been super interested in the weather and knew that that's what I wanted to do. After high school, I joined the Air Force, and when you go through the recruiting process, you know, they give you about 3 minutes to read the job descriptions, and then you got to pick a job. You know, you don't get to like sift through it. And when I joined, there was no internet really, so you can't just like Google, you know, what these career fields are. So they gave me a handful from which to pick, and weather seemed like the most interesting one. So that's the one that I went with. You know, I was truly fortunate to have picked that one over something else, and learning about the ways in which weather impacts military operations, and then bringing that sort of skill set and knowledge over to the, you know, emergency management side and being able to apply it here. You know, really, I can't, you know, it's been sort of a dream profession in retrospect, and you know, really fortunate to be able to help out the city and to help out the residents in emergency management and work with our partners. So, you know, to protect, you know, life and property. So.
Thanks, Josh. So, you know, for me, it really was something that I enjoyed from, you know, when I was young. You know, I was always interested in, actually started with like dinosaurs when I was first, you know, very young, but I always had that interest in like natural science. And, you know, I think weather kind of just took the forefront as I went through elementary school. I remember some big blizzards, and, you know, of course, you know, get a nice big snow. I grew up in Long Island, born in Queens, but grew up in Long Island. So, you know, kind of, you get a good snowstorm, you get out of school, so maybe there was a, you know, kind of linkage to that as well. But, you know, the big, you know, one of the kind of the, you know, deepest memories was Hurricane Gloria that hit our area in 1985. So that was the last hurricane that actually made landfall in our local tri-state area here. And, you know, we lost half the trees on our block. You know, I remember, you know, standing on the porch, was probably not a good idea with my father, just watching the storm go through, and, you know, the trees falling, and then we were without power for several days, didn't have school for several days, but just the power of nature. I think that's what captivated me. And then also the impact to just us as a family, you know, a lot of people on our block and stuff, you know, some of the damage, and I just thought, you know, initially for me it was just the science of it that was really interesting. And, you know, that kept on growing. I think, you know, that was, like Josh was saying, before the internet. You know, I was probably the only kid who was watching the Weather Channel a lot. You know, that was like the only place you can get weather information as I was going through, you know, right into college actually. So people kind of thought I was a little strange, but I knew then I had a passion for something, right? Went to school, and I actually took a circuitous path. Actually was a biology major, pre-med, went to dental school for a year, but all that stuff, it didn't fire me up, and I decided, you know, I knew meteorology was something that I really had a passion for, went back to school for it, went to Stony Brook University, and you know, it just, you know, things have, I think as Josh was saying, kind of dream job that I think I hoped for kind of when I was little, but, you know, never thought it would come true. Yeah, I've been at the National Weather Service Office for 19 years. I started as a volunteer, kind of worked up through the ranks, and now I'm, you know, warning coordination meteorologist, which is kind of more a management position. But, you know, one of the things with that is a lot of interfacing with our partners, with the public, with the media, and, you know, I always thought I'm just going to be the science person. You know, I like doing research. I like providing or putting out forecasts, but, I've always been an introvert, and, talking and communicating with people was not something that was in my comfort zone, but I found this to be, one of the most fulfilling, really the most fulfilling job for me, that I do get to interact with, people like Josh, Remy, talk to our media partners, talk to the public about, safety, and really kind of have an impact, and especially working with our emergency management partners, helping them to plan for, and prepare, preparedness plans, the emergency plans, learning about the vulnerabilities, their timelines, decision, thresholds, all kinds of stuff like that. Actually providing information that, stuff that we can provide to help decisions be made and life and property decisions. I think, for me, it's a great kind of purpose to my life, and it's kind of adding, with that passion. I think it's great.
You were not the only kid that watched the Weather Channel growing up. So
That's good.
I grew up in Lincoln, Nebraska, right in the heart of Tornado Alley, and my passion actually was birthed from fear. I was very afraid of storms as a child, would have recurring nightmares about tornadoes as a kid. I can still see it in my brain today. And so in order to get over that fear, I started reading a lot about weather, watching the Weather Channel, and it quickly turned into a passion. I was amazed by the fact that we'd have this nice, warm, sunny day, and about 4 o'clock, all of a sudden, it felt like the atmosphere exploded with thunderstorms and tornado sirens. So I thought I would spend my career as a TV meteorologist. I started that way after college, so I was on TV for 2 years. My first day on television was Hurricane Dennis, which was not a well-known storm, but a month later was Hurricane Katrina, and I was in Mississippi for that. Then I moved to Kansas City and dealt with winter storms and tornadoes. And so after 2 years, I sort of got to kind of check all the boxes I wanted to in television, and had an opportunity to lead the broadcast meteorology program at Mississippi State University. So I spent about a decade training meteorologists to deliver and communicate weather on television, internet, radio. In fact, Brittany Bell, who is one of our meteorologists here in New York City, was one of my students, which is, it's really fun to get to watch her on TV now here in New York. And after 8 years of that, about 10 years, I knew that I wanted to continue helping people make really strong weather decisions. So that's when I moved into the private industry with DTN, where now our focus is with a lot of municipalities, governments, and private companies that have some form of weather risk. And so now we're just translating weather information into really useful risk mitigation tools and software. And it's been fun to see the spectrum of being a television meteorologist, communicating to the public, training the next batch of meteorologists, and now working with business and partners such as we are here today. Is really neat to see all of the avenues of weather communication and the different ways that we can make an impact with our weather knowledge to try and make everybody safe and try and lessen weather risk.
All right, thanks for sharing. You all had like different paths, but ended up all in meteorology. It was very interesting.
We all ended up at the same table.
Yeah,
That's pretty amazing.
Thank you for sharing. I also did watch Weather Channel for Weather
Good,
on
good. Absolutely.
Oh, great. So let's get to the meat and potatoes of this roundtable, which is NOAA, the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, unveiled its Atlantic hurricane season outlook, noting that it will be once again an above normal season. What does this mean for New York City, and why is it important?
Sure, yeah, so, so NOAA put out the outlook. DTN also puts out we put out a very similar outlook for this year. When we do our hurricane forecasting for a seasonal outlook, we look at really 3 different factors go into developing a seasonal outlook. That's kind of a hard thing to do, to be honest, is predict how many hurricanes you're going to have in a given year. But there are some skills to be able to do that. So the first thing we look at is we take an assessment of the atmosphere at the current state. We go back and look at years prior where the atmospheric pattern was similar. We call those analog years. And one of the top analogs, go figure, was last year. So the pattern is actually similar on the global scale to last year's hurricane season, which was also a very active one. We ended up the Atlantic Basin last year with 21 storms, and DTN's prediction is 21, which is right within the range of the NOAA prediction as well, which is above normal. And we also look at teleconnections is a tool that we use, which is basically looking at taking measurements at different parts of the globe, and you can discern. Most people are familiar with El Nino or La Nina. That is a teleconnection. So this year we are in a La Nina pattern, which is also, and it's starting to trend towards a neutral phase in the in that teleconnection. But so looking at each of those patterns and then recognizing that we've got a very warm ocean already set up across the East Coast and in the Gulf of Mexico, and looking at the steering patterns, we believe that there's going to be an active pattern this year for tropical cyclones. The other thing for New York that we need to be really mindful of is that the steering patterns favor this year, we believe, more of a track that would support tropical systems moving towards the East Coast and the Southeast US, as opposed to more of the Western Gulf, which we'd seen several years prior with Hurricane Harvey and some of the other major systems. So no doubt that we need to keep a really watchful eye on this tropical season. For New Yorkers, it's very important to already make that hurricane plan. What are you going to do should we have a storm that makes impact across the boroughs, and whether that's post-tropical or with direct impact, as we've seen in cases like Sandy several years ago, or those post-impacts like Ida. Either way, getting tropical impacts, we know, make a major impact on the city. So it's just important to start planning right now, understanding if you were asked to evacuate, what does that mean? Are you ready to do so? Do you have that go kit ready to go? Really just making sure you have all of the sources of weather information. We like to recommend having at least 2 sources of weather information. That can be apps, television, a NOAA weather radio is really important to keep, but just having all the tools to get the information you need to make the right decision. So just because we're having an active year does not mean that that will be a direct impact on New York City. We just know that the threat is there this year. And so here in the early parts of the season, now is the time to just think ahead of what the plan will be should impacts come towards New York City, and how, personally, how are you going to respond and make the right decisions so you can keep yourself and your family safe.
Yeah, thank you, Rennie. So I think, Rennie touched on all that. I think in terms of like the outlook, there's a lot of similarities. Basically, we're looking at a lot of the same data. NOAA, the outlook, the hurricane outlook is produced by the Climate Prediction Center and the Hurricane Center together, so they're experts. They are looking at a combination of dynamical models, statistical models, but I think one of the big things is the climate. And so as Remy kind of mentioned, El Nino versus La Nina, that's of course a big factor in this, because it's kind of teleconnection to how the atmosphere is conducive or not conducive in especially the main development region of the tropical Atlantic. So with a La Nina pattern like we did see last year, it is conducive, especially in terms of wind fields in the tropical Atlantic. The other thing that has been looked at in terms of climatology is also water temperatures. One of the things there is this long scale pattern called the Atlantic multi-decadal oscillation, which is basically kind of just a sea surface temperature kind of anomaly pattern. And we've been in kind of the warm, or kind of the phase that's where a warmer water temperature in the Atlantic, and with tropical systems, that warmer water actually is a fuel, especially when you're talking about water temperatures above 80 degrees. So it's that is favorable for that. And also favorable, another thing that is favorable for is sometimes, especially in that main development region down in the tropics of the Atlantic, is we look for disturbances come off of the east coast of Africa. And so when we are in this favorable multi-decadal oscillation, it does favor an earlier and also kind of a more active, what we call them, it's basically a little kind of, I guess, the starters for what could turn into tropical storms and hurricanes. So coming off the west coast of Africa. So that is more active. You have less kind of wind shear or kind of winds that can disturb the formation of these tropical systems. So that points to a more active season as well. And so, kind of the combination of those, the wind shear, the more active kind of incipient storms and the warmer water temperatures, all favorable for a more active season. And then in terms of, the Climate Prediction Center has looked at least data over the last, I believe since 1990, since we've been in this actually kind of this warm phase or warmer Atlantic temperatures. And they've seen that when we are in an active season, in these, or above normal season, in this warm phase, actually the potential for a landfall. So this is just development in the Atlantic. When we talk about above normal activity, it doesn't necessarily mean landfalls, but they have found that, I think kind of similar to what Remy's saying, along the Atlantic coast, there's actually double the probability of landfall of a tropical system in these above normal years than below normal years, and there's a higher chance of landfall along the Atlantic coast than along the Gulf Coast in these above normal years. So I think so no matter what, even if the forecast was for below normal activity, we always say it takes one storm. You really can't, you want to prepare every season. And that's what I think is important for New York, is even if we were saying it's a low activity year, case in point was, Andrew in the early 90s. That was a quiet year in terms of total tropical activity, but you asked residents down in South Florida, that was life-changing, destructive, deadly, a Category 5 hurricane. And that was a quiet, that was a quote-unquote quiet year. So we really have to, as New Yorkers, prepare every season. This is the time to do it. And I think Remy kind of alluded to, some of the things is I think New York City does a great job, I think, of anybody in terms of the Know Your Zone campaign. You want to know, are you in a flood zone, storm surge? Are you in an area now we know a little bit more with Ida? Are you in an area that could get affected by freshwater, urban flooding? If you are, have an evacuation plan. Where are you going to go? What are you going to take with you? Who are you going to tell? What are you going to do with your pets? Things like that. Also, having a disaster supply kit, 3 days, food, water, medicine, batteries, for your cell phone, things like that. And then, you want to do just a typical for your residents, checkups, make sure that it is storm kind of ready, especially for the hurricane season. If we are impacted, your insurance checkups, and then, most importantly, work with your neighbors. A lot of times we come together after an event to check on our neighbors and help them. But, sometimes I think especially before these events, see how you can help your neighbors, especially those who are, maybe ill, infirmed, elderly, those who may not have all the resources. So, yep, that's kind of, I think the most important thing is the preparedness now, and hopefully can mitigate impacts as we go, later.
Thanks. Yeah, I don't have too much to add to all of that. I think the big thing for us in terms of the seasonal outlook is, of course, nobody wants to have an above average, seasonal prediction. But when you have a forecast like that, it really does allow, agencies like New York City Emergency Management to get out and say, hey, we really need New Yorkers to be prepared and to know their zone and to know what their sort of localized vulnerabilities are. And we were really fortunate this year to actually host the unveiling of the Outlook upstairs in our Emergency Operations Center. So, you know, when you couple that with the recent memory of having, if you include Ida as a remnant storm or post-tropical cyclone, really we've had 5 tropical systems impact New York City over the past 2 years. And you know, Isaias two summers ago was really the most impactful storm we had seen since Sandy. And then of course, you know, we had Tropical Storm Faye hit us that same year. Last year we had Elsa, Henri, and Ida. And so when you add another above average season onto an already really active 2 previous years, it really, you know, I think gives us a little bit more of a platform to try to help New Yorkers really get out there and be prepared. You know, in any given year, there is a low probability that a tropical cyclone is going to hit your exact location. So you might go a decade without anything hitting New York City. But what you don't want to lose is the preparedness, because once you lose that, you know, the sort of disaster part of it all, you know, the event's a natural event. The disaster part of it all can really be exacerbated. So, you know, keeping New Yorkers prepared, having opportunities like this to speak to you all, so you can go out to your communities and sort of help with their preparedness as well. That's really what you know, NYCM is here to do.
Thank you all, and that's something we do push here at NYCM. We try to push individual preparedness, so thank you guys for talking about that. You guys kind of answered my next question, which was, can you share the science behind the 2022 Atlantic hurricane season outlook? Can you guys elaborate a little bit more into the preparation of unveiling the outlook for the 2022 season? Nelson, we can start with you.
Yeah, I think, so it is really, and we do rely on the expertise of the Climate Prediction Center, at least for NOAA Climate Prediction Center and the Hurricane Center experts on it. So yeah, it is heavily on the climatology, as we talked about, was, you know, with the water temperatures, looking at activity off the west coast of Africa, in terms of being kind of the seeds for tropical development, and also the kind of the wind shear and moisture, especially at higher levels. You may have heard of like Saharan dust layers and things like that could inhibit formation. That's the areas of drier air that are coming off at the mid and upper level, coming off of Africa and at the mid to upper levels that could inhibit, you know, development. So those are all things that are looked at, you know, by the forecasters, and then so they're taking that, you know, how are the models initializing, looking at multi-models. So it's not just one model, they're looking at ensembles, so lots of models that show kind of plausible scenarios of how the season will evolve. So you're looking at, you know, these are kind of more, you know, dynamical models, so they're taking into account like basically trying to mimic how the atmosphere works. There's also statistical models, which are kind of like a hybrid, you know, looking at climatology with the, you know, the model, you know, kind of the dynamics, the dynamical modeling. So that's, I think that's kind of a big thing in terms of the outlook. And then as you go into the season, it's really that, you know, the National Hurricane Center is, you know, they are the national center that we coordinate with. They're, you know, part of National Weather Service, but their expertise is watching, monitoring these systems, you know, maybe incipient systems, just, you know, clusters of thunderstorm, maybe you have like a tropical wave or something like that coming off the coast of Africa, or maybe just developing in the Caribbean, could develop off the southeastern United States. Certain times of the year are kind of more favorable for different development in different areas, but then you know, and then they're watching, are the conditions right? You know, for development, some of it is, a good part of it is based on modeling, using a combination of dynamic models. There's also hurricane models that, you know, a lot of money and a lot of resources go into, you know, improving these, you know, these modeling capabilities every year. And then, you know, just the advances in supercomputers, I think, are helping in terms of having higher resolution and more ensemble models, which just allow for, you know, maybe better, you know, resolution or capturing how the atmosphere works, and then how the complexity of of a tropical system as it develops. You know, and so some advances that help to more realistically model these events, and then also these ensemble systems showing, because weather modeling is not a perfect science. The complexity of the atmosphere is it's infinite, and so to be able to provide information that is skillful, you really want to look at a range of plausible solutions, looking how things could be perturbed here and there a little bit, whether it be temperatures, whether it be moisture, whether it be pressured fields, something like that. But to be able to give different plausible solutions of when, as we're going into the season, of how a storm may develop. And that's how really they go about their forecast. And they use remote sensing is a huge thing. All right, we're looking at a cluster of storms out there. Could it develop into a tropical depression or a tropical storm where you start to see, sometimes circulation winds at least 39 miles per hour, or a hurricane? You're using a lot of satellite information. Satellite information is huge. We have geostationary satellites, polar satellites, polar orbiting, microwave imagery. So a lot of ability to tell, kind of both visible, infrared, water vapor, a lot of different tools to tell how that is interacting with a storm, how the storm is developing, how the circulation and thunderstorm activity is kind of all intertwined, and that gives a lot of good information in terms of how the current status of the storm, and then allows the forecasters to kind of extrapolate from there. You've heard about hurricane hunters, probably. That's a key piece of information. Satellite can give you satellite is amazing. Since the 1970s, the advent of satellites has helped to detect, especially over the ocean, any type of development of tropical storms, or even just tropical depressions, or even tropical waves. I think that's been a huge advance in the science of tropical meteorology. But still, in terms of having observations of what's happening inside that storm, that's where the hurricane hunters go in there and can get information using. They have microwave radiometers that they can actually kind of get information in terms of the wind profiles and wind speeds from the surface up. Drop sondes, which are kind of the opposite of radio sondes that we send up, upper air balloons that give us pressure, temperature, moisture information. Instead, they're dropping it from the plane down to the water surface. But all that is really important information that goes back to the hurricane center, that you can use to calibrate the satellite data, use with the model data, use with their forecaster. They have a lot of statistical aids and forecaster aids, and just cutting edge research that they utilize to make the forecast on these individual storms. So just a little insight into what and that's us as the Weather Service office. We're working with the Hurricane Center, throughout the year, and especially if there's a storm that could impact, our area. There's a lot of collaboration that goes on. What we're doing, they're tracking the storm, they're looking at the development and forecasting it, and we're taking that. How is that storm going to affect us in terms of impacts? Storm surge, wind, rainfall, rip currents, possibly tornadoes, and then taking that to really fine-tune the forecast for our area, and then working with our emergency management partners to provide the information to make the decisions on evacuations, mitigation, preparedness. Oh, sorry.
Yeah, so our process is very similar in terms of creating our outlook. What's interesting is we've already dodged one bullet this year that we hadn't in the last 7, which is we didn't have a storm prior to hurricane season. So the last 7 years we've had our first named storm in May. This year we thankfully made it to June 1st and then had a storm right after that. But so the season didn't get started early. What DTN does with our outlook is we work with a lot of the private businesses, and so one of our big sectors is the oil and gas industry. And so when we put this outlook out and have a good sense of where we think the tropical season may really ramp up, we start to run drills with the oil and gas companies so that they can make and essentially run simulations for what would happen if a hurricane gets into the Gulf of Mexico. And that might not sound like it matters to New York, it really does. We know gas prices are unfortunately way on the rise right now, but our work is to essentially allow the oil and gas companies to stay working as late as possible before evacuation and get started back working as quickly as possible. And that saves all of us money at the gas pump at the end of the day, because we're trying to reduce disruption to the drilling, the processing, the refining process, and so forth. And so that's, as part of the whole weather enterprise, that's where we spend our time focusing on, is looking at how can we keep the supply chain up and running the best way possible. And that affects all of our communities in unique ways by keeping prices lower, making sure we have enough material, getting enough food to the right places, and keeping that function safe, so that should there be disruption here to the city, we can get the best amount of supplies in. We work with a lot of teleconnectivity companies to make sure if we see that there's going to be an event that comes into New York, that we can maybe get networking supplies brought in temporarily so that we can keep internet and communication lines open. There's a lot of different ways where a forecast, while it affects people directly when it hits them, there's a whole other world of supply chain that's impacted by weather, either upstream or downstream from where we sit, that impacts us directly and indirectly. And so that's where we take a lot of our information and release that to many businesses in a way where it kind of impacts their supply chain, so they can make really good decisions that help us and allow us to eat and fuel and stay protected.
Absolutely. Thank you for sharing that, Rennie, how your work affects us, even like things you don't think about with gas prices, which in turn affects maybe food pricing and all that stuff. And gas is a hot topic these days.
It's
extremely high prices. So yeah, thank you for sharing that perspective. So how does your organization, we'll start with you, Rennie, how does your organization fit into the disaster cycle? And how does your organization work with emergency management agencies during these events?
Yeah, great question. And so I think the example I just provided is one good way where you might not see the direct impacts as obvious, but we're touching so many different things. Even the utilities, we aren't just forecasting weather, but we're predicting power outages, which allows the utilities to stage and make sure that they get their mutual assistance needs so they can get power restored as quickly as possible. And we're working with the airlines to make sure we're transporting people safely. So part of the emergency management cycle is the businesses and the supply chain downstream that we spend a lot of our time working on. But specifically in this relationship, it's been really exciting to me to watch how this partnership has unfolded, to work with the Office of Emergency Management, to work with the National Weather Service, and then as DTN. I think New Yorkers should feel a lot of confidence in the fact that the Office of Emergency Management is watching, learning, and always striving to get better as a result of past experiences, so that the next time the next storm comes, the city's ready to handle that. And we are honored to be part of that process. Where we can come into play is we can use the experiences that we learn in these different industries I just mentioned to provide hyper-local information to the cities and try to predict impact across the various extremes. New York is such an urban area with so much pavement and so much infrastructure that creates its own unique challenges in itself. What's great is we work with the MTA, for example, and provide weather information to them as well. We work with a lot of airlines and airport authorities, and so there's a connectiveness that can occur as all the services that the Office of Emergency Management provides to DTN is providing insights down to the operational level of each of these different service bays, that we can be a connection point and help make sure we're communicating across lines, so that when we get into those incident command scenarios, You know, we can be at times galvanizing communicator of weather information to the different entities and making sure they're getting weather information that's pertinent to their decision making.
Yeah, I think you know, I want to echo Remy's comments about just the proactiveness and just the amount of preparedness and the resources that New York City undertakes to prepare for all types of, well, I can speak more on weather hazards, but all types of weather hazards, but all types of hazards. And so where our role is to kind of help in that is it's kind of before the season. It's something like this is really the outreach, education on both sides. We're learning about what the vulnerabilities, what the timelines, what the decision points, action levels are for New York City, and that helps us, informs us when we're trying to improve our products and services. How can we best suit what especially what our partners, we concentrate on, we have the role of the whole tri-state area. But New York City is 8.5 million people, so that's a big portion, and wide variety, of socioeconomic, cultural, ethnic, language, all types of kind of backgrounds, and you're talking about all the way from public and private services, businesses. There's a lot, and for us, it's kind of learning about all that, how all that works, where the needs are. So I think that a lot of that, is going on in the preseason here. Josh and I talk a lot in terms of just, how do we, Josh does a great job in terms of brainstorming. What does New York City need to improve for, different hazard preparedness, mitigation, different actions, and we kind of brainstorm how can we as the Weather Service kind of help with that, and it's the part of that is also kind of just the whole weather enterprise. DTN is serving a role in that in terms of the hyperlocal, and we can kind of provide more maybe a bigger picture kind of role with this. So it's with that. We do a lot of education outreach, webinars kind of preseason. So right now doing a lot of tropical webinars in terms of what are the products and services that we provide, so that our decision makers, emergency managers are ready. If there is an event, they understand what the products are. But what are the hazards and vulnerabilities that are realistic to our area? What are things we haven't seen? We're kind of familiar with what storm surge can do with Sandy. We're familiar with Ida now with rainfall. But what about destructive winds? We haven't seen something. We saw Isaias, but is that a worst case? Was Sandy a worst case? And so those type of things, providing that education on the hazards and vulnerabilities, and a kind of the two-way learning. Then as we go into the season, ahead of a storm, really that's kind of where our role in terms of providing the official products and services, combine us in the National Hurricane Center, whether it be routine forecast products, maybe a week out, outlooking the potential for some type of tropical system or something to kind of pay attention to. Hurricane Center has great tropical weather outlook, that 2 and 5 day outlooks that are highly recommended, that to keep aware of just little disturbances, maybe even coming off the coast of Africa, something developing in the Caribbean, even before it's a named storm. Could give heads up in terms of what to expect. But so those are just examples of some products, and then as we're as the system approaches, there's a lot of what we use is a lot of probabilistic information in terms of wind speed probabilities, storm surge probabilities. Because there's a lot of there's inherent uncertainty with any type of hurricane, tropical storm forecast. You can have the best track forecast that science can kind of give you, but with anything, just because of the complexity of the atmosphere, the chaos, especially as you go out in time, there's more uncertainty. So that's the reason we use probabilistic forecast, to give you what are all the plausible scenarios. And then when looking at something like that, we really kind of, hone in on what is a kind of a reasonable worst case scenario. I think that's something that we utilize quite a bit in when we're talking, especially life-threatening type of events. Storm surge is a big example of that, is using this type of probabilistic information and what are reasonable worst case scenarios that the city may have to prepare for with an impending storm. So it's kind of these probabilistic information suites, forecast products, as well as the hurricane watches and warnings, storm surge watches and warning, flash flood products, all those things that you may have heard of. That's all kind of part of what we do with the Hurricane Center in terms of issuing these ahead of an approach of a storm. And then I think a big part of it, there's so many different products that it can be confusing. I think we take it, where the next level, and really what we've been concentrating on to improve as a weather service over the last decade or so is weather support, is decision support services. And so how do we make all that information, you probably, you go onto a NOAA site and there's a ton of data, right? But how do I find what I need? And how do I make an action that's gonna protect lives and property? And that's where our weather support comes in. When, there's weather briefings we do, but we do a lot of consults with New York City, any type of potentially significant weather, hazardous weather. We are, doing consults and steering calls with the city to provide, not only the big picture, but knowing their action points, decision threshold, what's of concern, being able to pull that information out and kind of make it as clear and concise as possible, so that New York City emergency management, mayor's office can make decisions. So that's kind of where we are. And then of course when we're in the storm, this is where we also have warning operations. We can issue, you see flash flood warnings, tornado warnings, severe thunderstorm warnings. That's looking at the radar data, satellite data as the events unfolding, providing that warning information. So if we need the public to take action, emergency management to be ready, that's kind of the go, take action with these warnings. And then it's just the information flow during an event. We're getting information from emergency management, we're getting information from the media, putting out information statements to help everybody stay informed, and then putting out public safety information. So that's kind of some of the things that we do, with New York City emergency management. Just I think to aid in terms of their similar mission of protection of life and property, and how they can help amplify what we do, and how we can amplify what they do.
Yeah, thanks. So, my role sort of as part of the disaster cycle, on the sort of blue sky days, or when you're doing like more strategic planning, it's trying to help the city think about ways in which it can write its emergency plans, and how do we respond to and react to the types of weather information and the weather data that were given by DTN and by the National Weather Service. So, and it's really focusing on the key bits of information and the key data sources that we want to use to make decisions. When you think about weather as a whole, I can give you on any given day thousands of data points about the weather, winds at a certain time, temperatures at a certain time, how it's changing, how a storm's coming in, et cetera, but we don't just want to, as meteorologists, we don't just want to go out and give you pages and pages worth of data. So one of my, main roles in this sort of, strategic part of planning is to really find the data sources and the products that are issued by our partners that are most useful for our operations. Now, when a storm is inbound, or something's starting to brew, my next sort of role is to notify my chain of command and the executives here at NYCM that, hey, something's brewing in the Atlantic, and as Nelson mentioned, National Hurricane Center does a 5-day outlook. DTN provides us with daily long-term outlooks and, talking about, potential core storm, evolving here and so on and so forth. And my role with that information is to push that up the chain quickly, because for something like a tropical storm, we have to start making some decisions at that 5-day point. So, if the outlook's coming out on day 5, that's right when sometimes we really have to get the ball rolling. So sometimes a couple of days ahead of that, I really try to say, hey, like this is something we really need to watch, and then try to advise as to when we should really start those daily phone calls with the National Weather Service New York office to get their portion of the forecast. The other part of my role, in the sort of days and hours leading up to the storm, is to also provide briefings and data and information to anyone who wants it in the city. So, obviously New York City government is fairly large. We have a huge workforce. We have partner agencies that have a lot of their own emergency plans that they have to sort of enact when there's a big storm coming. We reach out to community leaders. We speak with business owners. We do a lot of engagement within the citizenry, and part of my role is to take the data that DTN and National Weather Service, the National Weather Service gives us, and then to do those sort of smaller weather briefings and provide them with data that they need to make their decisions. As the storms are sort of ongoing, it's like really bearing down on the city again, taking the watches and warnings that the National Weather Service New York office is taking, the data that we get from DTN is constantly streaming in as well. We work very closely with their forecasters, their operational forecasters that sort of Rennie oversees. And so really, again, taking weather information and tailoring it to the operation. So as opposed, again, to just throwing a bunch of data out at you and saying, hey, figure it out on your own, it's selecting the most important data, sort of parts and providing that and tailoring it to whatever operation is sort of ongoing. And then there's a response and a recovery phase as well. So, what is the weather going to be in the immediate aftermath of the storm? Sometimes you get a couple of days of thunderstorms that might move in after you've been hit by a tropical cyclone. And so, that can disrupt the recovery operations. And again, that's where, I'm taking all the data that we're being given, sort of synthesizing it and tailoring it to, sort of point specific operations in the city.
All right, thank you, Josh. Hold on to the mic, just have you answer this next question. When monitoring coastal storms and hurricane activity, what are some of the key elements that you watch for?
Obviously that really depends on the sort of where we are in the process. At the onset, it's really, it's using the National Hurricane Center outlook, and using the DTN outlook and seeing what it is that they have analysts that are looking at, all of this data that's being produced all the time. The data is refreshed constantly. So, you have to have teams of people and teams of experts that are looking at that and then putting it out, for other meteorologists to sort of analyze and use. So really I'm using, I'm not going out there, I don't have my own hurricane hunter, although that'd be great, but I'm using the data that they're providing us to, again, inform executives as to say, hey, like, look, this is a storm that could really impact us, or maybe it looks like as of right now, this storm maybe is gonna head the other way, but maybe there's a chance it could shift elsewhere. So really, what I'm really trying to key in on is sort of what the outlooks are, what the tropical experts are telling us is gonna happen, and then looking at the model data and sort of trying to see the best ways we can be prepared. If a storm is getting closer, then we're really starting to fill in the details. how much rain are we gonna get? What are the wind speeds gonna be? What is our threat for tornadoes in the storm? What might the storm surge look like? And from there, you know, again, taking the data that's given to us and provided to us, and helping decision makers sort of better understand what it is that's being provided. You know, weather is a very jargony sort of field, and sometimes just parsing through all of everything that's being, you know, given to you can be very difficult if you're not if you don't have a lot of experience in weather. Fortunately, you know, all of our EOC teams, they go through weather training. They have a good, you know, understanding of what the weather means, but there's always questions about what a certain term means, or what, you know, a certain even data on its own, like what does this data actually mean? And so a part of, you know, what I'm doing is taking that and again applying it operationally and just sort of helping people make sense of what's going on.
Yeah, you know, I would say to really highly recommend the tropical weather outlooks from the Hurricane Center, to really, in terms of just monitoring during the tropical season. We're of course paying, you know, we're looking at satellite data, you know, model data. You know, we'll take a look at Hurricane Hunter data, you know, aircraft reconnaissance, looking at buoy data, things like that. But really, we do rely on the expertise of the National Hurricane Center. You have some of the foremost tropical experts who work there, and that's really what their focus is. It's just watching these little disturbances that are, you know, could be just a cluster of thunderstorms. Maybe it looks innocuous. Maybe an old, you know, sometimes we call them a cutoff low. Could be an old, you know, type of mid-latitude you know, weather system that had been sitting over say the Gulf Stream for a while, and then starts to develop some tropical characteristics. This is what the National Hurricane Center does. It's even before they name it, before it even develops tropical characteristics, they're watching this, and so that's you know, that's part of it is for us to be in coordination with our national centers. Who have the expertise to look at, you know, just at one focus. You know, their entire focus at the Hurricane Center is tropical weather. You know, us at the weather service, you know, at the local weather forecast office, we have to have that experience and expertise in tropical weather, winter weather, severe thunderstorms, coastal flooding, hydrology. There's so many marine weather, aviation weather, so there's so many different things, and that's where with the national centers, there is a storm prediction center who has, you know, experts, and, you know, a lot of the research papers you see come from these guys who work at the storm prediction center. Same thing for the National Hurricane Center. The expertise, the cutting edge research is being done, you know, a lot of things being done down there. So we really utilize their experience, their expertise, their forecast products. And again, I think those 2 and 5 day outlooks, as Josh was mentioning, are really the keys for us to just monitor. If we do see something that we feel is a concern, and we want to give a heads up, we can provide that to New York City. And then especially if there's a named storm and something that could impact the East Coast, then we start to ramp up operations in terms of providing weather support and weather information, more specifically, you know, for our emergency management partners to prepare.
Thank you, Nelson. Rennie, do you have anything you want to add?
Yeah, what I would say is when you kind of get into the near term, you've got a coastal system or tropical system moving in. Our focus tends to be on moving into the impact-based forecasting. That's where some of our models that are taking weather as an input and then predicting impact becomes really important. So Isaias was a really intriguing one for us because we run a model that takes previous weather conditions and looks at the impact on power outages, and then we take forecast weather conditions and expect what you'll see for power outages. It turned out in Isaias, that storm, with the nature of his moving pretty much due north or maybe even slightly northwest, brought a different wind direction than normal, for wind speeds of that height to the Northeast US. And as a result, we saw different impacts. There was actually slightly less power outages than we might have with a westerly wind coming in to the area. So we start to get down into, when we say hyper local, we're looking at predicted weather conditions, but then the outcomes from that for operational intelligence of utilities, for cities, for transportation clients, and so forth, and really start to get down in. And then there's the rapidly updating cycle, looking at radar updates, as the gentleman mentioned. You know, it gets really intense when there's these storms moving in. We have our team of tropical experts that get busy that time of year as well.
Thank you, Rennie. Speaking of winds, when hurricanes occur, what causes the most damage?
It really depends on
Which factors?
yeah, so the factors, first and foremost, you got the wind. So you have really strong winds, obviously will cause, you know, trees to fall, damage to buildings and power lines. Storm surge is a really important factor in tropical systems, where you get basically for lack of a better term, a rising sea that pushes the water in onshore, and then waves on top of that can cause, you know, the power of water is really, really intense. People don't give water enough credit for how strong it is as a force. So storm surge is really impactful. And then flooding rain, especially as systems either stall near a coastline or they move inland and start to interact with other features like frontal features and so forth. That was one of the challenges from Ida, was that a post-tropical system interacted with a normal warm front, and those two combined is kind of a really strong combination for flooding rain. So typically we look at wind, storm surge, flooding, and then occasionally tornadoes will pop up in tropical systems as well.
Yeah, I mean, I think Rennie hit it on the head. You know, those are really the keys. You know, and unfortunately, we're in an area here that's you know, very susceptible to storm surge. Just to all of those, really. Storm surge, just the geography of our area. You know, and the amount of population we have along the coast. So the high vulnerability, and then the consequence, as we saw with Sandy, unfortunately, with significant or, you know, deadly storm surge events, is you know, loss of life. So storm surge, and the other thing is, you know, also infrastructure with storm surge, you know, versus you know, Ida, where you had a freshwater rainfall event, which can cause subway flooding, infrastructure flooding. But there's a difference. Saltwater doing that same type of flooding can have you know, detrimental and destructive effects well after. So, you know, storm surge is definitely, and one of the things in terms of just water, I think as Rennie alluded to, I think there's a saying, you want to run from water, you want to hide from the wind. You know, that's why evacuation decisions, and New York City does a great job in terms of evacuation planning. You know, reevaluating every so often with upgrades and you know, GIS, inundation kind of mapping techniques, and upgrades, and you know, some of the ensemble modeling of storm surge. But you know, so I think that's why it's important to have, you know, planning for reasonable worst case scenarios and preparing for reasonable worst case scenarios, and then also having these you know, these really rigorous evacuation you know, plans in effect. You know, fresh water, as we saw with Ida, you know, unfortunately is also, you know, a huge killer, and sometimes the compounding effects. I think you know, it's where you can have you know, high astronomical tides, and we had it, you know, Sandy, we saw the storm surge, but we didn't have a lot of rainfall with that. Ida, we had the heavy rainfall, freshwater rainfall, which you saw the destructive effects of that and the deadly effects. But we didn't have really any tidal concerns. But that's the thing with New York City, you can have compounding effects of both the maybe high tides and storm surge and heavy rainfall. We fortunately have not seen something like that you know, recent, but I know New York City is, you know, running a lot of scenarios to look at what the combination could be, and even just a warming planet, raising sea level. That's gonna have a lot of impacts in terms of stormwater drainage, and just the susceptibility of the city to flooding. Just outside the city, we have a lot of riverine areas that are very, very vulnerable to any type of rainfall, but urban areas in itself. We know just the subway systems, storm drainage, you can only handle about 1.5 to 1 3/4 inches an hour. You're looking at a system like Ida where we saw 3 to 4 inches per hour. That's just become exceedingly excessive rainfall that has to go somewhere, and unfortunately can be quite destructive. Winds in this area, especially because you're dealing with the unique vertical skyscrapers and things like that, so it's almost you have like even greater impacts that may not be as strong maybe at the surface, but you could have significant damage up at higher levels with the skyscrapers, and then of course tornadic events. And one other thing I will mention that for our area, and unfortunately we've already had some fatalities this year, is rip currents. Rip currents every year, sometimes it doesn't get as much publicity. Every year it's behind heat per year in terms of being a killer is rip currents, and unfortunately we do see a lot of fatalities in and around New York City. And why I mention that is because when you have tropical systems that are not even affecting the local area, but could be a hurricane down by Bermuda, sends powerful waves up this way, and which are conducive to higher rip current activity, and especially some of our beaches, the Rockaway beaches, where you have a lot of jetties and kind of interacting with these waves can really even amplify rip currents. And the other thing is, we do have most of these rip current fatalities are occurring after hours, non-lifeguarded beaches. 99%, just looking over the last 20 years, 99% of rip current fatalities have occurred at non-lifeguarded beaches. So after hours, or in beaches that don't have lifeguards. And also it could be young kids who don't, may not know how to swim, may not know the dangers of the ocean. And so I think that's a big message to kind of get out is, besides the wind, the storm surge, the rainfall, tornado impacts, I think the rip current impacts are excuse me, are huge, and something that we see all too often, being a killer that could be prevented if we can get that messaging out.
Yeah, I think we've covered all the hazards pretty well. So do you want to go on to the next one?
Nelson, you touched on Hurricane Ida and how it was an unprecedented weather event. Can you explain a little bit more why it's different from other storms?
Yeah, so I mean, and really it was the rainfall rates. I think that really was the big thing with Ida. We had Tropical Storm Floyd in '99. We had Irene in 2011. Both of those brought, in terms of rainfall to the city, similar amounts of rainfall to the city as what we saw with Ida. Even maybe it could be a little bit more. I mean, generally 5 to 9. With some of these other events, we saw in excess of 8 inches with Floyd and Irene, but they did not have the same impacts that Ida had, because the rainfall rates were not as excessive as what we saw with Ida. Floyd and Irene, we saw generally, up 1 inch per hour rainfall rates, maybe, in some cases briefly, maybe a little bit higher than that. But that's within the standards of the stormwater drainage system to be able to handle that. Be able to handle 1.5 inches to 1 3/4 inches an hour. But with something like Ida, where we were talking about rainfall rates 3 to 4 inches per hour, really that just, and over, not just one localized area, over a good portion of the city at one time, just overwhelmed the whole infrastructure in terms of being able to, the storm drainage system, we had roads that basically turned into rivers. And it also, and this is kind of where we learned in terms of some of we had never seen before, where the flooding had gotten so bad where you saw basically enough water kind of rushing down a street to have, to basically cave in a basement apartment where, occupants didn't have time to get out. So, and that's what made Ida different. It was the rainfall rates, being extremely high over a large area and only over really a couple of hour duration, but that was enough. We saw kind of expose what some of the vulnerabilities are of an urbanized area with a lot of older infrastructure to be able to handle those type of events. So yeah, it's something though, I think that just kind of going forward, one of the things that I think the hope here, just like with after Sandy, being able to improve the science, the service, learning more about the vulnerabilities, learning more about how do we better communicate these events like during the storm. We have tools like wireless emergency alerts. We have our different flash flood warnings, impact based, but are they getting the response that's needed to? So a lot of things that are being post-analyzed to improve. Do we see an event like that in the future? I think that's where the whole private weather enterprise is working on now. And I think just like we're in a lot better shape post Sandy now, a decade later. I strongly believe we look down 2 to 5 years from now, we will be in a better place, and then a decade from now, definitely a much better place to predict and communicate these type of events with time to prepare.
Thank you, Nelson. Josh and Rennie, if you guys don't have anything else to add, I'll move on. Okay. So climate change continues to create more extreme weather events. The federal government has identified age, race, education attainment, income, and ethnicity as factors that impact an individual or family's ability to prepare and recover from emergencies. What are some of the things your organization is doing to address communities of color who are disproportionately impacted by climate change?
Okay, yeah, so I can start with that. And I think that's a big part of it is the relationship we have with New York City Emergency Management and with our emergency management communities. We have definitely we have tried to we're trying and we're taking steps to better serve especially underserved communities. One thing is we initially, if you go back probably like a decade ago, we only had, all our forecast information was just in English. So now there's been a lot of emphasis for outreach material, our forecast products, social media to now have, Spanish language in addition to, the traditional English language products, and this continues to be work on that. But we know with New York City, you're not just talking about just 2 languages. You're talking about dozen, maybe hundreds of languages, and this is really where we work kind of in 2 ways to work with our political appointees. We've done so political appointees. New York City Emergency Management is a huge partner in being able to better serve underserved communities, and also through some educational initiatives. So just through political, we've held, for one example is kind of just holding kind of town hall meetings or meetings with, say in the Bronx, we've done this with Representatives Serrano and Torres, where he'll have some of the community leaders who come down, some of the public, to be able to kind of express what are some of the concerns and vulnerabilities of the neighborhood, and for us to be able to show this is what NOAA provides, this is what the National Weather Service provides in terms of public service and products, and just making that connection. I think that's the start to help to help underserved communities and help better serve them. Other things that we are, New York City, emergency management, I think, any type of emergency management, they really have their kind of the boots on the ground, having that feel of the city. They have their outreach, programs, working with religious leaders, working with community leaders, really having that face-to-face and those relationships where we're providing the information to New York City. Josh is, and DTN is providing that information. Josh is taking all that information, and able to package it into something that can be distributed around to not only within New York City Emergency Management, to the stakeholders, but going down, that will get down to the community leaders, the religious leaders, and can be, translated by, translated to maybe a language or an approach that best works, but also, providing that information by a trusted source. I think that could be also a challenge is, when your federal government saying this is what we're doing and, trying to, get information from groups that, who may not, who may not have a trust of the federal government. And so I think it's having that part is developing those relationships, working with our emergency management community to do that. And the other thing is we're doing is working with our school systems. With the CUNY school system, we've been doing this for over a decade now. CUNY has a great program in terms of, to expose underserved communities to science and technology. And so one of the things is we've had a partnership for a while. We're working actually with graduate students, undergraduate students. We do a summer camp each year with high school students from underserved communities through the CUNY school system. But we're also, we have a couple of graduate students who are really remarkable, who are working on some heat vulnerability studies for New York City, especially for, and kind of looking at the socioeconomic profiles, and then also looking at kind of heat profiles, and seeing, where the connections are and how can we better serve and better target information. There's also another project that's being done on flash flooding, and it's very topical after Ida. And we're actually in a project, and these are jointly with the New York City Emergency Management. We're in a project with Stony Brook University, who's specifically looking at how to better communicate with historically vulnerable communities. What are the best methodologies, and from there, the findings with it, because it's a collaborative research project with NOAA, that can go and help inform a better approach for NOAA going ahead to better serve these communities. So a lot of things that are going on, but and it's going to be an evolving process.
Thank you, Nelson. Josh?
Some of the things that we do in emergency management, specifically we have Notify NYC, and that's a huge program that we use to alert individuals who have signed up for that as to all kinds of things that are ongoing in the city, but certainly to include all sorts of weather events. So the National Weather Service issues a flash flood warning. We amplify that messaging through Notify NYC, and at last count, I think it goes out in 14 languages.
Yes.
So, we're really trying to get out and speak to those communities who may not, traditionally, have weather information communicated to them. In addition to that, we have, community preparedness teams that really go out and work very closely with community leaders, with religious organizations, with nonprofits, with business leaders to help them sort of better prepare their populaces and their communities. And then in addition to that, we have Ready New York events where we go out in all 5 boroughs and we sort of provide resources and we sort of promote, we give preparedness tips and we sort of provide information, to community members on the ground, people just walking by and saying, hey, have you packed a go bag? Have you thought about this? And we provide that service as well in a number of different languages. And I think this is really, this reaching out and helping to protect, historically marginalized and underserved communities is really a pressing challenge with climate change and certainly with tropical storms in general, because they have historically taken, the brunt of the storm, unfortunately. And so I know that this is a really big focus for the current administration. It's been a focus for New York City emergency management for a while, but how do we really get out to those, traditionally underprotected and underserved communities to help them be prepared? And so, those are just sort of three of the examples. We have all other kinds of programming that we do, but.
Yeah, I'll take this a little bit different way, which is what DTN, a lot of our work is in developing countries actually, and so we're going across to, especially in Africa, South America, we work with a lot of governments to build weather infrastructure where it's been severely lacking for a long time. And we're talking about some of the basics, right? I don't know if we have the appreciation in the United States that we should for the National Weather Service and the amount of data that's available to the public. Our government really does a pretty phenomenal job. When you start to get outside the United States, that's not the case. And if you go into Africa, for example, you can go hundreds, if not thousands of miles without coming across a weather sensor that's taking basic information like temperature, wind, and dew point. So DTN is focused a lot in those areas. We have a large agricultural part of our business, and so we are supporting the agriculture communities in other parts of the world in providing weather insights that can help them grow basics like food. And that's a really important mission for us. It's becoming even more important as the climate changes. And the farmers in those parts of the world will tell you the way they worked on their land 10 years ago has changed dramatically, and they need insights on how to work on the land today because the climate is changing and therefore the weather's changing. It's becoming harder for them to maximize the crop on their fields. So it's a little bit different answer. We're also super supportive of the answer that the guys provided earlier. We've started providing alerts in our apps in multiple languages. We've tried to simplify call to action so they're understandable. Flood warning, go to higher ground. Try to make it more simple. And some of the things that the guy said is just so important to us as well, which is making sure everybody has a fair shot to get information that can save their life, and we certainly are happy to be a part of that as well.
Excellent. Thank you all. Last but not least, what do you recommend that New Yorkers do to prepare for hurricanes? Nelson, you want to start?
Yeah, sure. So I think we probably kind of touch on some of the things, but yeah, now is definitely the time to prepare. I think Know Your Zone that New York City does is really kind of a great campaign. Is knowing are you in some type of, we've said run from the water, hide from the wind. So especially if you're in an area that has a vulnerability to storm surge, to now we're kind of learning that especially maybe basement areas, to freshwater flooding. Those are the two big ones. I think knowing whether you're in that type of danger zone, and then you want to heed the evacuation orders. So once you know that you're in that zone, if you don't know you're in that zone, talk to your local officials. Talk to New York City has a lot of great resources to find out, are you in those type of water danger zones, I'll say. But once you realize you are, you want to have a plan. What are you going to do? Where are you going to go? How are you going to kind of inform those your other family members, telling them where you're going? Do you what are you going to do with your pets? Things like that. Just basically having a kind of a plan of action when you're asked to evacuate. And then the big thing is, we're working. DTN, National Weather Service and Weather Enterprise, is working to provide that information to New York City, the weather information that's going to help them make the decision. So these decisions are not taken lightly. When there is a life-threatening, a life-threatening hazard and potential life-threatening impact, that's why you will be, asked to evacuate. And there's a reason that's being done, and you're in a vulnerable area, and the potential is for loss of life. So you want to heed those evacuations. So that's where having that plan, you can kind of react quickly, you can go ahead with that. Again, having a disaster supply kit, 3 days of food and water, the reason for that is, say we are in some type of event where public safety and first responders can't get to you for a couple of days. You want to at least be able to be self-sufficient for a few days. Have those medicines that you need, batteries, your cell phones, things like that. I know some have, one thing to kind of be, in that recovery, post-storm. What's interesting, I think one thing just as a term of kind of caution, one of the things that we did that was found after Ida down in the Gulf Coast, where Ida made landfall as a Category 4 hurricane, they had 6 fatalities due to storm surge and wind, which is a testament to the early warning systems, the work of the emergency management, and people being educated and leaving the areas they should leave. But they had 35 plus fatalities due to carbon monoxide poisoning and heat-related illnesses. So things to kind of keep in mind is, some people may have generators and not using them properly. So using generators properly if you do have them, and how are maybe paying attention for cooling centers that the city may open post events if you don't have electricity. Then again, just kind of things to kind of fortify your home dwelling. If you are just going to be hiding from the wind and you're not in an area that is requiring evacuation, home insurance, things like that. And again, working with your community, checking on your neighbors. I think those are all, just really things we should have in mind, and this is the best time to really think about that, brainstorm, and have some plans.
Josh or Renee, you guys have anything you want to add?
That's pretty spot on.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think Nelson covered the big ones, fortifying your property, having a plan with your family, having reserve supplies. Another thing I will add is that, if you hear any information about a storm coming your way as a New Yorker, what you really want to start doing is paying close attention to the forecast. Even if you're 5 days away from a storm, you really want to start doing, checks every couple of hours as to what the latest forecast is, because we're always getting new data. We're always making adjustments to the forecast. It's not static. And particularly, even if you're not in a storm surge vulnerable location, winds and heavy rainfall and obviously tornadoes can be destructive. And so you really want to pay very close attention to what the forecast is in those days and hours leading up, and most critically even the day of. You might have a total blue sky day the day before a major hurricane impacts the area. Some people might go to the beach, treat it as a normal day, but that's when you really want to start paying attention to the latest updates, because storms can intensify very, very quickly. Something like Ida, we had great information, and we knew that Ida was going to be a destructive storm in the days leading up to it. But I don't think we necessarily had high confidence in Ida being a catastrophic storm until the hours leading up to it. So sometimes just paying attention to those time frames when the storm is just several hours away, having your local, one thing that we're really thankful for are, having, the media to be there to amplify our messaging and the National Weather Service messaging, just keeping the local news station on it and seeing what the forecasters are conveying there. Those hour by hour updates can be very critical in sort of being prepared for the storm. So, and of course, signing up for Notify NYC, everyone should do that.
Yes, absolutely.
I'll add one really quick thing is I would also encourage people to be wary of weather information you receive on social media. I think it's really important that you're getting information from official sources and meteorologists. There are a lot of social media accounts that will take one run of one model that looks scary for areas, and they'll just blast images of it and kind of create a doom and gloom. Very early on, Josh mentioned about overwarning. That's actually part of the overwarn process, is that there are, call them fake accounts, maybe that's not the right term, but there are accounts that are hyping weather that don't need to. And so I can assure you that the National Weather Service, DTN, Josh, all of us are reviewing way more information than one single weather model and taking years and decades of experience to come up with forecasts and have an understanding of what those are going to impact the city and the infrastructure and the citizens. And so it's important to make sure you verify where you're getting weather information from, so that it's an official source that can be trusted as well.
Great, thank you all. Thank you everyone for joining us. We're gonna move along to the Q&A. I'm sorry, I know I kept you guys a little over. So anyone who has questions for our meteorologist?
I have a question. My name is Javier Castaño from Queens Latino. I also remember Gloria. I used to live in West Hampstead, an island. So, and now I live in Jackson Heights, and this is my question. Before Ida, what was wrong with the communication? I was in a restaurant eating with my friends at night, and it started raining, drizzling, and I parked my car in Jackson Heights, and then I went home and, oh, it's raining, and suddenly more news about that the train is not working, that the 74th station in Jackson Heights people are packed there, and then my friends who live in East Harlem, East Elmhurst, near the LaGuardia Airport, called me and say, listen, all our basements are full of water, and our cars are floating in the streets. So I go, what? So what went wrong with the communication? What went wrong with, I don't know, whatever.
Yeah, and so, no, and I can really kind of empathize with that. And we have friends who kind of had, living in Queens as well, who had damaged the cars or actually damaged their properties as well. I think this is kind of part of it, is that whether, as well as it can, there's certain limitations to the skill, but even in an event like this, where, many days in advance, we can talk about, all right, 3 to 5 inches of rainfall, which is a considerable amount of rainfall. I think the challenge is how do we kind of, take that forecast and to, kind of signal to the public that this is something that is out of the norm. This is something that has an elevated risk, especially threat. I think what we're really concerned, the threat to the property, but especially threat to life. And so I think, as we were kind of discussing before, the real challenge with this was the high rainfall rates. We had seen localized areas. We actually saw right before Elsa and right before Henri, we had a couple of flooding events in New York City. We saw 2 to 3 inches of rain in a short period of time. And it flooded, localized areas, but this was unique in that you had rainfall rates, 3-4 inches of an hour over a large area of the city at one time, and just overwhelming, the roads, the subways, the whole storm drainage system. So, the challenge, I think, for us is, we had flash flood watches in effect 48 hours in advance. So it was getting, working with New York City Emergency Management. New York City Emergency Management already activated their flash flood emergency plans. But, sometimes what you find, and then, as we went into the event, we had flash flood warnings that we had issued, and, we have these new impact-based warnings where you can kind of increase the severity. So, going from a basic flash flood warning where you may have some streets that are flooding, things like that, things we see during the summer, to more of a considerable level where you start to get alerts on your phone, gets more activation, say maybe across TV, radio networks. And then we went all the way up to a flash flood emergency level, as we were seeing the impacts that were coming in, as we're seeing what we're seeing in terms of radar data, just how this rainfall, the intensity of the rainfall, and what the impacts are. Now the thing is sometimes it takes these types of events to learn, what are some of the gaps? Maybe that, because we do issue flood watches for events that may, or certainly not to this level of an Ida, may just be for some thunderstorms that we think are going to produce pretty heavy rain and some localized flooding. How do we differentiate those type of events? I think that's one of the things that we're learning that we need to do better. And find better ways to do that, and part of that is working with our emergency management community and some of the action that they're taking in terms of having a more scalable response, and for us is to be able to provide information for that. And the other thing is learning. All right, we do have the alerts that come across on the cell phone when it's a more extreme flooding situation, but who is receiving them? How is that information being read? Is it providing enough information of what to do? All right, I see there's a flash flood emergency, or that's in effect. So what do I do? Is that information enough? Is it in the the language that needs to be? Is it is cell phone? Not everybody may have access to cell phones to be able to kind of understand that information. So these weather events are going to happen, and quickly escalating weather events. But I think it's incumbent, and that's incumbent upon us to learn, all right, what happened, where was the disconnect in terms of...
So can I rephrase my question?
Okay, go ahead.
So I believe everything is local.
Yeah.
So it's probably the weather was, it's raining, but it's not raining the same way in different parts of the city. So how come East and North didn't receive a warning saying evacuate or move your cars?
Yeah, so the warning was, this is perfect, is that there was a warning, and we actually issued multiple warnings, but the fact that it was not received or not understood, that's a concern, right? And so this is part of like what we've been trying to do is kind of post-assessment, is working a lot with our emergency management, media partners, to kind of understand, all right, what was the timeline of events, and where was the breakdown in terms of information not being received. So you bring up, this is something, and we can talk more about it, is did you ever receive something on your cell phone saying that there's a flash flood warning and this is getting kind of an escalating event? Where do you potentially kind of get your weather information? Those are the things, and I know Josh was kind of talking about being weather aware. I think this is part of the education aspect as well, is checking on the weather forecast, and especially something like that where, all right, you got a hint of, all right, they've been talking about, this storm coming, but, I mean, it rains all the time, right? And I think that's the thing, it rains all the time. What am I gonna, I'll take an umbrella, I'm not thinking loss of life, right? And so I think it's just, how do we do a better job of making it, we're the weather enterprise, our media partners, private sector with Josh and New York City Emergency Management. How do we, make that more apparent that this is something you want to pay attention to, and and take personal action to stay weather aware, and then if I do get these warnings, to take action. I think that's the challenge in terms of that, because this is something we know we put out the warnings, and we feel that when we're sitting in there in the office, and it's getting a lot of information coming in. We're looking at all this radar data. We're concerned. We're putting out this warning information, but the biggest thing, if it's not getting received, it's not understood, not being acted upon, it's really of no use. And that's I think that's where we. And I think things like this and kind of the post analysis is where, all right, how can we improve that? There's actions taking place to do that, but I think kind of feedback that you're providing can help us do that even better.
Yeah, I'll add real quick. Some of the most research actually going on in the meteorology field today is in the social science side of meteorology. So. What's interesting in my own personal family, I have a father who, if I told him a tornado was coming at him, he'd say, oh, that's just a thunderstorm. And I have a niece of the same family who, if there's a dark cloud, will go to her basement and take shelter for a dark cloud. And there might not be a threat at all. we all respond uniquely to everything that occurs. And so I have strong conviction in the fact that there were alerts that were sent out in that way, but it is incumbent on us to figure out that and recognize, much like we can all consume content in different ways from each other. Some people love podcasts, some people love TV, some love radio, some love, go on and on and on. Same too with warnings. We've got to create an infrastructure here where the message is received, where people are receiving it. So us just pushing an alert and knowing that it got sent, it's only as good until the last mile. It's got to get to the right place. It also has to have language that makes people react. And some people want the fear of God messaging put in there with exclamation points and all capitalization and really strong wording like catastrophic and life-threatening, and others just want to know there's an alert. And so we don't have that solved perfectly today. I believe that's a factor. Anytime, I can tell you from a meteorologist perspective, it is frustrating to read headlines that say it hit without warning, because that is rarely true, that there wasn't a warning present for some weather event. However, we do have to recognize that we've got to look for the methods of delivery, communication, and get it in the right hands so that people take actions and we get the number from, even in Ida, which we're proud of, 6 people, only 6 people died in a hurricane. We want that number to be 0. And so still there's work to be done even in those scenarios. So those moments are really important moments for the weather enterprise to listen, learn, continue to invest in research and partner with our social science experts to understand the best way for us to take this great information I feel like that we create and curate, but get it to people in the way where they take the best action for themselves.
Thank you. Any more questions, Bruce?
Can you describe a little bit what factors or data you use to designate certain communities, to designate the hurricane zones for certain communities? So for instance, I cover Roosevelt Island, and Roosevelt Island's an island in the East River. It's about 40 blocks long. It's 800 feet at its widest. In the past, it was zone 2 for just the tips on either side of the island. Over the last few years, going south now, so that was like open space and parkland. But now zone 2 is being designated for more of the residential area, and it's moving south. So part of the island is zone 2, and buildings right next door are zone 3. And it doesn't seem to make much sense why one is zone 2 and one is zone 3. So I was wondering if you could tell us a little bit about why.
Yeah, so I can tell you about the zones sort of specifically. So, prior to Sandy, we had only 3 zones, and then once we unfortunately had that catastrophic event and we got to see, inundation levels of that high, we got to revamp the zones to make them more fine-tuned, and that's how we got to 6. This last summer, the model that we used to generate those 6 zones got an update. So it had higher resolution data. They were able to, and it also incorporated sort of new technologies like LiDAR. So we had LiDAR the whole coastline and saw, in 3D sort of what the topography might look like. And then when you combine that with the higher resolution model data that we got from the National Hurricane Center, what we call the slosh model, we were able to redraw the lines of where those zones would be. So that drawing, going from one zone to another zone, the difference is basically how much more inundation you might expect from more of a worse storm. So that model that we use, Slosh, it runs thousands of scenarios, and it takes all the worst case scenarios, puts them together and says, okay, if you have, a certain storm, so the factors that we look, the variables are storm direction, where is it going, what intensity is it, and what's its sort of forward moving speed. And then we always assume high tide, because we get 2 tidal cycles a day. your timing error for a storm approaching might be between those tidal cycles. So you always want to assume high tide. And then, so based off of those variables, we were able to say, okay, a storm, with these particular variables moving in that direction, this is going to be a zone 1 evacuation, and this is going to be a zone 2. So if you had a change, it probably occurred last summer. Now, drawing the line specifically between zone 2 and zone 3, you have to designate a line somewhere. And what we always say is that, if you're borderline, you want to treat it as if, if right across the block there's zone 3 and you're in zone 2, you definitely want to err on the side of caution. The model itself has I think the resolution is something like 10 meters, which is incredibly high resolution. But of course there are gonna, the model isn't gonna get those zones exactly perfect either. And we're fortunate that we were able to do a big update this year to the zones. I think overall we ended up basically the model was telling us that the worst case storms were a little worse than the previous model run. So I think we had to push some of the lower zones back a little further inland. And then I think we were able to actually, there were some locations that actually looked like the zone maybe been a little bit of a downgrade. So we made adjustments based off of that model that we were provided.
Thank you, Josh. We have a submitted question. I'm sorry. What's your name and outlet again?
Angie Damlaki from a Leo Arabi newspaper.
Right.
Yeah, I'm just asking if there is pre-training, for in person or on website for people before disaster.
Is there training?
Yeah.
For emergency preparedness.
For emergency preparedness.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so the New York City website, we have a Know Your Zone website so that people can understand what zone they're in. We also, on the NYC website, we have information about how to prepare a bug out bag, how to build a plan with your family and with your community. So we provide a lot of resources, of preparedness.
Mm-hmm.
In terms of monitoring the storm as it's coming in, some people are going to have their preferred sources. Maybe they like just watching New York 1 or something, or maybe they like looking at the AccuWeather website. Like Rennie said, you want to pick a trusted source. But the city specifically, we have a severe weather webpage. So if there's a big storm moving in, all the information that is given to us by our weather partners, we put on that page and we update. So that's another resource that the city provides. And then Notify NYC, again, this is a program that is relatively new and it's continuing to build and continuing to grow. We just hit 1 million subscribers. And so that's another, and because we provide it in 14 languages, that's another great resource for people to sign up and to keep apprised of incoming weather.
Yeah, thank you.
Oh, and also I just want to add on, Josh mentioned this earlier, but our Ready New York program has community preparedness education for all over New York City. And we also have a certified, a CERT program, which is our, any New Yorker get trained to be certified to assist with emergencies and large events. So like recently, I think, they were deployed for the Puerto Rican Day Parade. So just to give you examples of different programs that we have that's community preparedness based.
Yeah, and I can just add on, just in terms of, so a lot of great resources from New York City Emergency Management. All the weather data that we provide is on weather.gov. So this is part of the taxpayer dollars going towards a service, public service. Weather.gov and /NYC. You go to our webpage. A lot of resources there. We have actually a tropical link on there, so there's a lot of great resources if you're interested in learning more about tropical weather, the forecast products and services. What's the difference between a watch and a warning? Tropical storm, hurricane watch warning, storm surge watch warning. What does all that mean? Because you may hear about them on TV, on the radio, and this way, you know, you can have some knowledge about that. We do webinars, you know, we will do webinars, you know, once in a while for the public, you know, traditionally, and they'll be open to everyone. Usually we'll do them jointly with the National Hurricane Center. We do a lot of school outreach. I think that's always one of the keys for us, is to be able to talk to, you know, one thing I remember when I was little was from a firefighter who taught me about stop, drop, and roll, right? And I think that, you know, things like that, you know, they resonate with kids, and, you know, maybe hopefully take that through their lives. So we do a lot of things, a lot of outreach with school kids. We do we actually do spotter training. So if you have somebody who's in the community who's, you know, even more interested in weather, wants to learn about, you know, just watching severe weather, you know, the different cloud types, the different hazard types, and to learn more in depth about that, and even to be able to report it to the Weather Service, because that type of information helps us out in terms of not only verifying and validating and improving our forecast, but also to put out more accurate and timely warnings. So we have these Skywarn spotter training sessions that we do, that we advertise on our web pages as well. So a lot of, you know, at least on the meteorology aspect, you can not only follow the forecast, but learn a little bit more about the science. And we do a lot of stuff on social media, just, you know, through Twitter, through Facebook, and I know it gets amplified through New York City as well. Just great preparedness information, awareness information, educational information. So we try to do it through as many channels as possible. And then we're also working with our media partners. I think, again, it's like a lot of time you have your trusted source, but people like to see multiple sources of information. And so that's the whole thing, working with the Weather Enterprise. You're kind of working together for that same goal. So yeah, and you can always follow up with us if you need more links to information resources.
Thank you. Yes, absolutely. A lot of resources on our website as well. So, if there's any more questions, we can wrap up. I really appreciate everyone for coming. I want to thank our guests for taking the time out to come here and talk about their work and how to be prepared for hurricanes. Thank you so much. Really appreciate your time.
Thank you guys.
All right.
Yeah, thank you.